Hey everybody, Rob Maurer here. Happy last Friday of Q2. As we know, Q2 ends next week on June 30th, so Tuesday. And then Tesla publishes their Q2 production and delivery report within 3 days of quarter close. So that would be expected on Thursday or Friday, but the markets are closed on Friday as a reminder. So it'll be interesting to see if Tesla tries to get those numbers out on Thursday before market opens so that at least there's some trading and the market's not sitting on the numbers over a long weekend. I've been getting a lot of questions and requests for my updated forecasts. We'll definitely revisit that either on Monday or Tuesday before quarter end. But directionally, I think things are pretty intact from the forecast that I went through in May. So if you want to check that episode out again over the weekend, probably helpful. The forecast at that time was 83,000 produced and 88,000 delivered. That being said, there is some reporting out there on delivery numbers that I want to go through here today. First is from Electrek, and then we have some updated notes from Deutsche Bank and RBC Capital. We'll start with Electrek, and I want to preface this by saying that I don't put personally a whole lot of weight into this reporting, but I do still think it's worth discussing. Last night, Electrek posted an article with the headline, "Tesla could surprise with near record deliveries in Q2 despite pandemic." And the essence of this article comes down to one statement in the middle of it, which says, quote, "Sources familiar with the matter told Electrek that deliveries in North America have picked up greatly in June, with already more than 50,000 deliveries and almost 10,000 vehicles in transit," end quote. Fred's takeaway from that is, quote, "Right now it looks to me like over 85,000 deliveries is almost guaranteed, and depending on how Tesla handles the logistics issues over the next few days, Tesla could reach 95,000 deliveries," end quote. So again, I'm not putting a ton of weight into Electrek's source on this. When I went through my forecasts in May, I wasn't forecasting based on deliveries by region, but rather production by factory, and I had Fremont at about 48,000 for Q2. Then we also know that Tesla had about 30,000 vehicles in inventory heading into the quarter. So that'd be about 63,000 vehicles available to deliver in North America, less whatever Tesla ships over to Europe. Again, that's just off my previous production forecast, but the point here is that 50,000 deliveries in North America would definitely be in the realm of possibilities with those kind of numbers. Deutsche Bank also weighed in on deliveries. Analyst Emmanuel Rosner was out with a new note today raising his price target from $850 to $900 per share, saying, quote, "Despite about 7 weeks of downtime at the Fremont plant, we think Tesla's second quarter global production could be in the mid-70K range, ahead of buy-side consensus in the mid-60s," end quote. Rosner also expects Model Y production of about 10 to 13,000, which again we'll go through more detail on my expectations early next week. RBC Capital, which has a $615 price target on the stock last time I was able to get that number, has increased their delivery estimate from 72,800 vehicles prior to 80,900 vehicles for Q2 now. That puts RBC above consensus, which currently sits right around 71,000 deliveries for the quarter, which I think Tesla will pretty easily exceed. When we start to get into the higher end forecast though, we do need to consider that Tesla is jamming a lot of deliveries here into the final weeks of the quarter, and that can cause them some logistical challenges. Elon mentioned this on Twitter on Wednesday, saying, quote, "Apologies to Tesla customers for shifting delivery dates. It's a crazy world out there." And then adding, quote, "Special thanks to Tesla trucking and rail partners for figuratively and literally going the extra mile," end quote. I do still think that deliveries will outpace production for Tesla pretty easily in Q2, but it's worth keeping in mind, and there are likely some customers that will have to have their deliveries postponed to Q3 for whatever reason. We'll move on from deliveries for now then, but we'll stick with Elon tweets. He had a couple other interesting ones that I wanted to discuss. The first is on Supercharger usage worldwide. This is the third time I believe that Elon has shared this information, which is a percentile graph of the daily charge sessions as a percent of max by region. So for North America and for Europe, the maximum baseline of charge sessions was set in February. That obviously dipped significantly with the coronavirus situation through March and April, and has slowly recovered now, with North America's most recent daily charge sessions sitting at about 85% of the maximum that was reached back in February. The region of Europe, Middle East, and Africa is trailing slightly behind North America at about 75% of the daily maximum, and then Asia Pacific and China are up there at 100%, already pretty much fully recovered. Though of course, as the fleet grows, the number of daily charge sessions is going to increase as well because obviously there's more cars charging. In North America and Europe, this probably has a pretty small impact over this period of time, but with Gigafactory Shanghai ramping up, in China that fleet growth has probably actually been relatively significant over the last 3 or 4 months. So worth noting that would give a bit of a boost to the tail end of this graph. Nevertheless, clearly transportation is increasing significantly and rapidly. Elon says, quote, "North American Supercharger usage tracking to exceed pre-COVID highs in 2 to 3 weeks. A lot of noise out there. This is signal," end quote. That being said, we do have to keep an eye out for some pullback on things. We just heard today from Texas and Florida that they will be reclosing bars as coronavirus cases continue to rise. The next tweet of interest was a response from Elon to an animation of the Cybertruck taking on an amphibious form and traversing through either a lake or the ocean, with somebody fishing off the back, and the text on the tweet said, quote, "Looks like the waters are clear and I'll be sailing into your DMs tonight," end quote. DMs are direct messages for those of you unfamiliar, just for context there. Elon replied to this saying, quote, "I think we can make that work," end quote. What's interesting here to me, at least, is the original tweet was from December 12th of 2019, so I'm not sure if this somehow resurfaced to Elon or if he had just been keeping it in mind since then, but kind of interesting to see a response 6 months later. This is definitely not the first time this topic has come up. There have been a number of different videos over the year of Teslas floating through pretty deep flooding. EVs can act as boats for short periods of time because they don't have the air intake for the engine that an internal combustion engine vehicle has. Elon has actually talked about this going back as far as 2016 when he tweeted, quote, "We definitely don't recommend this, but Model S floats well enough to turn it into a boat for short periods of time, thrust via wheel rotation," end quote. And even on the Cybertruck specifically back in April, somebody asked about the Cybertruck's wading depth and if they could traverse across streams without damaging the truck. Elon said, quote, "Yes, it will even float for a while," end quote. So not too surprising to see this new tweet from Elon. It's just a little bit weird again that it was 6 months later, and also Elon says he thinks that they could make it work when he's already talked about it working before in the past. I don't know, maybe Elon was just referring to the more, we'll say, robust floating that is on display in this animation than what he was referring to previously. Alright, next up today I want to talk about the J.D. Power Initial Quality Study for 2020. This is the first time that Tesla has been included in the results. The study is based on a 223 question survey sent to new owners for their first 90 days of ownership of 2020 model year vehicles. J.D. Power then reports on initial quality based on a metric they define as problems per 100 vehicles. And of the brands included in the survey, Tesla ranks dead last with 250 problems per 100 vehicles compared to the industry average of 166. So we're going to go through this, but first of all, there is a caveat here that a lot of people have pointed out, and J.D. Power also acknowledges. Tesla doesn't actually allow J.D. Power to survey their customers, which you could interpret as Tesla trying to obscure data from J.D. Power, or you could interpret it as Tesla trying to avoid allowing their customers to be unwantedly solicited. Take your choice there, but 35 states actually allow J.D. Power to get that customer information anyway. So for other automakers, the survey goes to 50 states. For Tesla, it only goes to 35 states. So some people have argued that, okay, that throws everything off. This makes the data incomparable. Why is J.D. Power even reporting on Tesla then? Sure, I understand that argument. It's important to acknowledge that caveat, but personally, I don't really care too much about that. The 35 states are probably going to be pretty representative anyway. I doubt those other 15 states are going to swing the data significantly. But setting that aside, I think there are more important things about this that we need to discuss and understand. The first thing to understand is, okay, what is this problems per 100 vehicles metric defining? It's a bit tricky to find this information, but I actually found an article on this by Car and Driver back in 2011 with the title of, quote, "The Trouble with J.D. Power's Initial Quality Study." The subtext says, J.D. Power's initial quality study tells you less about vehicle defects than you might think. They go on to explain this problems per 100 vehicles metric by sharing some comments from J.D. Power's Director of Automotive Product Research at the time. Car and Driver says that he, quote, "explains that the IQS was designed to capture things gone wrong with a vehicle. Each one is called a quote-unquote problem and can be either a fault in the assembly of the vehicle or a design issue. A fault might be a poorly assembled door panel or a loose electrical connection, while a design issue is something that a customer doesn't like, a multifunction cruise control stock, for example, even though the item is performing exactly as intended," end quote. Okay, so that's the first thing to understand here. A problem to J.D. Power for this initial quality survey doesn't necessarily have to be a fault with the vehicle. It can just be something that a consumer doesn't like with the design of any element of the vehicle or any part of the technology. So keeping that in mind, when we look at the initial quality study for 2020, J.D. Power in the results says, quote, "Most premium brands are below average. For most of the past decade, mass market brands have improved relative to premium brands, and this trend continues in 2020. Premium brands generally equip their vehicles with more complex technology, which can cause problems for some owners," end quote. Can any of us think of a vehicle brand that may be including the most technology in their vehicles? J.D. Power continues on in these results to say, quote, "Infotainment is the most problematic category. Almost 1/4 of all problems cited by new vehicle owners relate to infotainment. Top complaints include built-in voice recognition, Android Auto/Apple CarPlay connectivity, touchscreens, built-in navigation systems, and Bluetooth connectivity," end quote. So super simple solution here to improve your initial quality score. Just simply cut out all that stuff. No problem, you're set to go. Obviously being a bit sarcastic there, sorry about that. But after reading those things, it should be no surprise that Tesla comes up a little bit more frequently on this problems per 100 vehicles report because they have more areas to report problems in. Here is what JD Power's Vice President of Automotive Technology had to say on the topic in an interview with Yahoo Finance.
What I thought was interesting about the study is one of the areas you found a lot of concerns were around the infotainment. So we're talking about the touch screen, the built-in speakers, the built-in voice recognition. Are we starting to see these cars just too many features, too complicated?
For some customers, that certainly is the case. I mean, customers, for the most part, want these features. They want a beautiful touchscreen. They want voice recognition. They want navigation in the vehicle. They want to be able to connect their phone seamlessly. So for most customers, they want these technologies, but at the same time, they're struggling with them. For many consumers, this is the first time they've experienced some of these technologies, and a lot of them are pretty complicated. They may work well when the automaker's testing them, with professional engineers in lab conditions, but then you put them into the hands of normal consumers who are just using it as part of their everyday life. And customers are complaining that a lot of these systems are just too complicated for them to operate while they're driving the vehicle.
All right, so that's the heart of the issue. People want this technology, but the more technology is there, the more opportunity for problems. So the more problems that are going to occur, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the initial quality is worse. Especially going back to what we talked about, a problem can be something with the design. It doesn't even need to actually be a fault with the vehicle. It can just be a misunderstanding by the customer of how that function actually works. A lot of people don't know this, but JD Power also publishes a number of different other results from surveys, and one of those is what they call their APPEAL survey. That's an acronym that stands for Automotive Performance, Execution, and Layout. This is supposed to be the study that focuses on the good elements of a car versus the initial quality study focusing on the bad elements or problems of the car. And we don't yet have the 2020 release, so hopefully Tesla will be included on that. The 2019 release came out in July, late July, so hopefully we'll get that next month. But if we look at these lowest scoring brands in the initial quality study for 2020, we have Land Rover, Audi, and Volvo. All three of those brands rank in the top 6 of this APPEAL study from 2019. Point being, this one metric of problems per 100 vehicles doesn't tell the full story. In fact, it doesn't tell much of the story at all. None of this is to say that Tesla is without their own initial quality problems. We've talked a lot about that with trim or paint, whatever the case may be. But Bloomberg did a massive survey of Model 3 owners last year, and it turns out that those things just end up being outweighed by how amazing Tesla vehicles are. So sure, we'd love to see those things improved. It's very unfortunate for some owners that have to deal with those issues and have a bad experience. But over time, Tesla does improve on these things, and Tesla is still a relatively very young automaker, and there are always growing pains associated with that. Any new vehicle is going to have more problems. If we go back to that same Car and Driver report from 2011, they talk about the example of Ford dropping from 5th place in the 2010 initial quality survey to 23rd in the 2011. They say, quote, "We haven't noticed a huge degradation in Ford quality during the past year, so what's going on? Part of the disconnect stems from most people's tendency to equate quality with an absence of defects," end quote. I think that's an excellent way to phrase it, and I think it makes sense because this is called an initial quality survey. A bit of a misnomer based on how they're reporting. So why did Ford drop so significantly that year? Well, it was based on the introduction of new technology. Car and Driver says, quote, "But while JD Power won't reveal the breakdown of problems on individual models or brands, the director does allow that Ford's plummet in the rankings was primarily due to design problems rather than defects." Quote, "Ford tried to do too much too quickly," end quote. So yeah, anyway, I don't really care too much about the 35 state thing. I definitely care a lot more about these other issues. And that's not all on JD Power. I think a big part of it is, but a big part of it too is also on the media's coverage of the reporting. Anyway, moving on, next up today we have some news on the California Air and Resource Board, which passed regulation for zero emissions trucks that we had talked about last week. This will apply from Class 2 to Class 8 trucks, Class 8 being semi-trucks. This regulation will require that by 2045, 25 years from now, every new truck sold in California will be zero emission. This starts to phase in beginning in 2024 with more progressive increases each year. I wish I could find the schedule of those increases, but I haven't been able to do that yet. The New York Times, though, does say that, quote, "More than half of trucks sold in the state must be zero emissions by 2035, end quote. Last thing today then, Amazon has announced their intention to acquire self-driving startup company Zoox for more than $1 billion. That's roughly the amount that has been invested into Zoox already, so not some huge premium, but this does continue to signal Amazon's investment and move into the transportation market. Obviously, previously they partnered with Rivian, to deliver up to 100,000 electric vans by 2030. I don't know a ton about Zoox. I know a lot of people have some interest in them. I know they use LiDAR in their hardware stack, but overall, regardless of this company or any other company, I think to me, where I always come down to is where the data comes from. And without having a fleet of vehicles that you're actually selling to customers, you're just never going to have the kind of data that Tesla has access to. So it is interesting, and Amazon is definitely a player to keep an eye on. They're obviously behind Tesla, but they aren't saddled with some of the legacy investments that traditional automakers are. So that helps, but it also doesn't mean that Amazon is for sure some immediate or large threat to Tesla. They've failed in hardware before. I don't know if anyone remembers the Fire Phone, but that was out for about a year. I don't know anyone that ever had one. But interest and investment in a space is no assurance of success. That being said, Tesla's probably not going to take the whole market, so there's room here, especially in logistics areas. What was interesting in Amazon's press release on the acquisition, though, was the emphasis on ride-hailing. I would have assumed that they'd be more focused on automating their logistics, but the headline of this announcement says, quote, "We're acquiring Zoox to help bring their vision of autonomous ride-hailing to reality," end quote, and they go on to emphasize ride-hailing consistently throughout the release. Obviously, that doesn't rule out commercial uses of autonomy. It was just kind of interesting to see that emphasis. Anyway, a lot there for today. Let me know your comments on these various different subjects in the comments. I'll be curious to hear from you guys, but that'll wrap it up for today and for the week. As always, huge thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and sign up for notifications. Make sure you're following me on Twitter at Tesla Podcast, and I'll see you on Monday as we wrap up Q2 next week for the Monday, June 29th episode of Tesla Daily. Thank you.